Good morning, everyone. I decided I'd try a change of pace today. I'll tell you what's different. For one thing, I woke up the other day and it was hot and it was humid, but the sky was blue and there was a light breeze. And you got to remember, I'm from New Orleans and I'm used to hot and I'm used to humid. As a matter of fact, the reason that I'm thinking about that feeling is that's the way that's the norm for summer. That's a good day in the summer in New Orleans, hot and humid, and a light breeze. Because to me back then, it's been quite a few years now. It meant only one thing: it was time to get on that sailboat and go sailing. I used to love to sail. I never sailed as a child. One time. I one time sailed as a child. I'm going to get sunburned sitting out here. I one time sailed as a child. And that time, what happened was we were at a lake, a friend's house. My parents had gone to a friend's house and they were at the lake. And they were... and they had a very small dinghy, just a little sailboat, big enough for Dad and me and my younger sister. And we had to put on our life jackets and we went sailing. And I was probably about 8 years old, but I loved it. But I never sailed again. That didn't happen again for many years. As a matter of fact, what did happen was that when I was turning 30. And of course, by that time I was divorced and I didn't have a lot of money, but I wanted to treat myself to something special for my birthday. And I decided, what the heck? I would see if I could go for a sailboat ride. But I found out that getting a ride on a sail, because right next to New Orleans is Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain is huge. It's 25 miles wide. It's not particularly deep in any place, but the water's brackish. A little bit of salt, a little bit of fresh water. It wasn't for that, but it was this big, wide open area with no bridges. So you didn't even have to worry about that. There were bridges on each end, but not in this huge middle. And it was great for sailing. And sailing was really big in New Orleans. They even sailed in the wintertime for New Year's when it's cold and miserable. For the big event there was the Sugar Bowl Regatta. But anyway, I decided, well, let me go rent a sailboat. And I'll tell you what, I went ahead and decided, and I started to look into going to maybe on a cruise or having somebody take me sailing, because at that time I didn't know how to sail. And it was kind of expensive. It was certainly more than I could afford. And so I decided, I know what I'll do. I saw this little ad for sailing lessons. I said, sailing lessons, $100. It was like $100 for sailing lessons. And you got like 4 lessons out on the water. And I thought, that sounds perfect. I'll take sailing lessons. And that was the beginning of my personal relationship with sailing. I'm going to move to a place where I'm not in the sun because I don't want to get sunburned. I'm way too fair. All right. Well, I moved over to a picnic table in the shade so I can continue recording my devotional. So anyway, I wanted to... so I'm just a little bit over. I'm out actually at Dangerfield Island Marina. I love that name. I've never sailed out of here because I'd given up sailing long before I'd ever moved up here to Virginia. But that's another part of the story, and I'll get to it. So anyway, I went ahead and I was talking about how I was going to treat myself to sailing lessons. And at work one night, I was working nights as a nurse in the emergency department, and one of my coworkers said, "Oh, Kathy, I'll take sailing lessons with you." And her name was Brenda, and I knew her all right. She's good. She's a good character, but I have to admit we weren't as close as we were yet to become because of the sailing lessons. So anyway, what I did was I went ahead and we started out for our sailing lessons, and it was everything I hoped it would be. We were just on a strictly sail boat. It was probably I don't know, probably just a little small boat, probably only about 12 feet or so, and we were completely under sail power, and I even bought a book on sailing, and I started studying, and I learned all about, the port is the port is the starboard is the right side of the ship, go right to the stars. That's how I remembered it, and port was port was on the left side. No, starboard's on the left side of the no, I am all wrong. Whatever am I doing? Starboard is to the right. You go right to the stars, and port is to the left. And the color for starboard is green, and the color for port side of a boat, if you've ever noticed boats, they have different colors on either side of them, so you know which side is facing you, their port side or their starboard side. And the color for port is red, like red port. So that's how I remembered it. And I learned about the names of the sails, the mainsail, the jib. And the mainsail is the big triangular sail on the back of the boat, and the jib is that triangular sail on the front of the boat. And if you had an oversized jib, an oversized sail on the front of the boat, well, that was called a genoa. I guess I'm getting into technical, but there's a few of you out there, I'm sure, that have sailed and maybe just enjoy hearing about it. But anyway, it was everything I hoped it would be. There was no motor on this boat. We were strictly a sailboat, but then, of course, my instructor was quite an experienced sailor. He also owned the reason he taught sailing lessons is because he owned a sailboat dealership, and he used to sell sailboats. And that was the reason, okay, that the price was so affordable. He wanted to get us interested in sailing, and maybe we'd buy a boat. But it didn't matter. I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. It wasn't hard. I was so proud of myself the first time. I remember when in practice one day, we were learning how to come up to a dock under sail, which can be tricky. And we went, because you got to make the turn, you've got to come up to it, you've got to drop sails at the right minute in order to hit the dock with enough, you got to still have enough momentum to reach the dock, but not so much momentum that you go crashing into it. So we pulled up to one of these dockside restaurants for lunch, and we were practicing. It was our last day of sailing lessons, and we made a perfect I have to admit, we made a perfect approach, dropped sail, went ahead and tied up the boat. And as we came in and dropped sail and pulled up so beautifully right to the dock, applause broke out from the upper gallery of the dockside restaurant. All the wait staff was watching us. I guess because they knew we were too small to have a motor, and they'd seen some rather fun comedic approaches from time to time, and they gave us a whole round of applause. But I really enjoyed it. Well, as it turned out, at the owner, the skipper who taught me to sail, also skippered a large race boat for one of the doctors who happened to work at my hospital. It was Dr. Dr. Levinson was the head of our biggest cardiology group at the hospital where I was working. So I sort of knew him, and when I mentioned I knew Les, he said, well, we're looking for crew. He said Les has a boat that he likes to keep racing. He can't always race it himself, so I skipper it for him. It's a 32-foot shock. And that's the length of the boat is 32 feet, and shock is kind of a high-end brand, and he loves to keep it racing on the Pontchartrain racing circuit. And we race on Wednesday nights, and we race most weekends in the summer. And then, of course, we always compete in the Sugar Bowl Regatta. Well, I thought, what the heck? A free ride? Well, it turned out that was one of the better bargains I had ever made, because it turns out not only did I get to to sail on this, I don't know, $500,000 race boat, which you got to remember, this was back, I was 30 years old, so, when was that now? See, I'm getting a mental block about my age. I'm 65 next month. So that had to happen. I forgot I was so near the airport here. This marina is right near Dulles. I don't know if you can hear that jet, but anyway, that's the hazards. This is an experiment, folks. I thought I'd try it, friends. So anyway, Dr. Levinson, I chatted with Dr. Levinson the next time I saw him. He said, yes, come crew on our boat. We need more crew to sail well. We need a minimum crew of 6 people. And if there's any wind at all, we're going to need at least 8. And I said, oh, I'm more than happy to come. And I found out, once I did the first one, that it's the perfect deal. You get to ride on this $500,000 sailboat. You get to ride on the $500,000 sailboat. You get to enjoy all the luxury. You get the fun of sailing and doing whatever your particular task is that day on the sailboat. You get to enjoy the lake. You get to enjoy the sound of the wind rushing water. You get the excitement of the race, and you also have to go to the yacht club afterwards to wait for the race results. Well, the thing about the yacht club is the only person you don't pay with cash at the yacht club. No, everything must be billed. And in order to be billed, to be put on the account of someone, they have to be a member. So it was traditional that the owner of the boat would pay for everybody's food and drink after the sailboat race, while they wait for the results. I mean, this was like wonderful for a not very rich 30-year-old who was looking to have some fun once in a while. In those days, my ex-husband used to take Michael on the weekends, so my weekends were free. It was wonderful. So anyway, what I did was I went ahead and I started sailing, and it was just wonderful. It really was. I mean, if you've ever watched sailing on television or maybe sailed yourself, of course, my first job, this is a great job. My first job was to go sit on the rail. You see, the boat may have the right tilt on it in order for it to be most efficient going through the water. The hull takes on, if you tip it a little bit, the hull takes on a slightly different shape that makes it more efficient going through the water. And that's what you want, because believe me, when all you have is the wind to drive your boat and you're racing, you want to milk every little bit of speed out of that machine, out of the boat as you can. So anyway, that's another jet. I may have to re-record this whole thing someplace else where there aren't no jets. We'll see. But anyway, you want to get as much speed out of it. So if the wind is heavy, if the wind is high and you want to put up a lot of sail, because the more sail you're able to put up and carry, the more speed you can take to a point. But the point is, you can only do it as long as you keep the boat at the right heeling, which is the seaman's term for the angle of leaning on a boat is heeling. You want to keep the boat heeling at the right angle. So if the wind was high, you have put people sitting on the outside rail to weight the boat down a little bit in that direction. It meant you could carry more sail and you could go faster. Now, if there was very, very little wind, you wanted it to heel, you had to force it to heel in order to make it just a little more efficient. So even that light wind would work more in your favor. In that case, you told your rail riders, which is what I was, a rail rider at first, to go sit on the low side so that it made the boat heel over a little bit. The shape of the sail took a little bit better shape, and the boat was more efficient, and you made the most of the light wind you had. I mean, they knew all the tricks, and that was the way to learn. I learned how to read the water, to look out over it and to see just by the amount of chop, or the amount of waves on the water, whether the waves had white caps or not, to read the speed. You also learn to look at it. You could see that the wind, actually, when you're out on the water, it becomes clear to you that the wind is just not constant all over in your general area. No, the wind is patchy, and you can see an area of dead space on where the water might be flat, and you could see another place where there's some wind, and you can know that if you sail over there, the wind is stronger. You learn to feel the wind get stronger in your face, and the wind freshened is what the term is, and it was just wonderful, and I loved sailing. From being a rail rider, I graduated to tailing on the mainsail. If you've ever seen that, that's the person who pulls while the other who goes ahead and grinds. I was a grinder, and I used to, crank it in, ease it out, according to what the main person on the mainsail was telling me to do. And then I ended up doing, that was the jenny trim. You grind and grind on this, because they, of course, had the big oversized sail for the jenny. And I would grind and grind on the jenny, I'd grind on the jenny according to the person who was doing the fine tuning of the trim. She'd tell me what to do with the sort of grind, with the sort of just barely trim, the little, with the grinding, smidgens, all this kind of stuff. And she liked that word. The person who did the jenny trim, she would tell me smidgens, and I just meant a little bitty bit, or grind. And that meant all you can do. And of course that would happen when we would tack. Well, sailing, you learn so much. Well, friends, you maybe wonder what happened. I was filming outside. I ended up filming that whole segment, and the jets were terrible. I lost out to the jets. And by the way, Dangerfield Park is not near Dulles. It's near Reagan Washington International Airport. Okay, it's near Reagan Airport. All right. I don't know where my brain was. I was half-baked, I suppose. Maybe I still am. But as I was talking about, I had discovered that sailing was a wonderful thing. And not being rich enough to afford a sailboat myself at that time, it was great to be able to sail on the Gale Force. That was the name of the boat. You see, the owner's, Dr. Levinson, his wife's name was Gale, so it was Gayle, Force. That's the way people do with boat names. And the Gale Force would go out twice a week usually, Wednesday nights and Saturdays, and that was just a lot of fun. And we would race, and it was enjoyable, it was relaxing, it was exciting. The Wednesday night races were simply just a very simple out and back race. Wednesday nights were relaxed. There was this constant breeze that blew from onshore over the lake. You could always count on it in the summertime, most Wednesday evenings as the sun set. And so consequently, you could sail parallel to the long shore, sail down a few miles, you'd turn around the mark, and then you'd sail back. It wasn't hard work. It was a time to relax and visit, and then the excitement, when you have to round the mark, the buoy that sits there to mark the midpoint of the race where you turn around. That was always exciting. And then you'd go back to the yacht club and wait for your race results, and we'd have pizza usually and some beer, and it was really very, very nice. We had a lot of fun. And on the Saturdays, though, that was the serious racing. That was usually a big triangle. And with the triangle, you'd start out, that way you had to sail on more than one point of sail. You see, sailboats can't sail directly into the wind. That's called the no-go zone. No go. But when they sail what's called close haul, they sail as close to the wind as possible. They go off in this direction and then they tack back. And that's how you sail upwind. You go back and forth and back and forth, tack back and forth. And that was always exciting. That was always good. And then you'd have to do you'd turn and make that mark, and you'd go and you'd go in a different direction of the wind. And it was really, now the dangerous part of sailing is when you sail downwind, because when you have to change direction, when you have to sort of, when you're zigzagging a little bit and you have to change direction, that's called jibing. Now the problem with the jibe is that the boom, that is if you remember, you have your mast, and then you have a sail that goes over the back of the boat that's attached to the mast. The bottom of that is called the boom. Well, the boom, when you're sailing downwind, the boom is usually kind of out to the side to catch as much wind as possible because the wind's coming from behind you. Well, when you jibe, the captain calls out, well, he always calls out his commands, but what my skipper used to call out was prepare to jibe, and then jibe ho, and you better duck, because that boom is when the tail of the boat passes through the wind to go on the other direction, that boom's going to slap over. And many a person has gotten a concussion or been knocked in the water and drowned because of that. So there was a little excitement. Nobody ever got hurt on the boat I was on. And also, one of the things you do when you sail straight downwind that you don't get to do very often is you sail with that big, colorful, oversized balloon sail in front. It's called a spinnaker. That's what most people think of when they think of beautiful, colorful sailboats. Those are those beautiful spinnakers. Our spinnaker was white and red, white, and blue. It was really a beautiful spinnaker. And spinnaker trim is kind of the pièce de résistance in jobs upon the boat, unless you're the skipper. But I was never the skipper, believe me, I was never that good. I started off just sitting on the rail, and I think I explained to you about that. And then I graduated to trimming, to being the grinder when they would trim the front sail. In our case, it was a little bit oversized, so instead of just a plain jib, it was called a genoa. And then I went to mainsail trim, and I would get to trim the back sail, and that was always good too. And a few times I did do spinnaker trim, and that was a joy, because going downwind with the spinnaker, usually the wind feels, because you're going with the wind, the apparent wind that you feel in the back as you're standing on the boat, doing the trim of the sail, watching the sail, keeping it inflated properly so that it catches the wind properly, so that you can get as much speed as possible. The apparent wind that you feel is not so much. I mean, after all, but it is, so it seems relaxing. And I love sailboat, because what you do is you listen only, there's no motors. The noise you hear is the water rushing over the hull. It's just wonderful and relaxing. I have to admit, one of the most beautiful things to see is a spinnaker start on a sailboat race. The beginning of races were very exciting. Everybody's jockeying for position. You don't want to cross the starting line before the gun, but you want to cross it as soon as possible. And so you can't have your spinnaker up when you do that. But as soon as you cross the line, if you're on a downwind, then you can go ahead and pop your spinnaker and your chute, they called it, but your spinnaker, and it just poofs up and you take off. And when you look behind you, and all the sailboats around you, behind you, or have their spinnakers up, and you see 20 or 30 spinnakered sailboats, it is incredibly beautiful. Well, I've learned a little bit about editing, so I wanted to show you some photographs. This is not the Gale Force, but this is a boat. This is the same boat, same size boat. This is also a shock. And by the way,
I sailed on a shock 35, not a 32, like I say repeatedly wrong in the video. But you can see how you need a crew of 6 to 8, and it's a good size boat. This is actually a picture from the Lake Pontchartrain racing circuit. This is when we'd sail on Wednesday afternoons, and if you can see, they're all just cruising nicely, headed for the mark. The wind is coming in from the shore and blowing out over the lake, and it makes for a wonderful sail. And here's another view right behind you, and if you notice, this is also a Wednesday night race, and the one thing wonderful about Wednesday night races is you always had such beautiful sunsets. You always did have gorgeous sunrises and sunsets when you're out on the water. And this is a spinnaker race right here. The boat, the spinnaker we had was most like this one right here. This one probably looks most like the spinnaker that was on the Gale Force. I have to admit, this was wonderful, and I hope you really hope you like the pictures.
And we were sailing across Lake Pontchartrain, and of course we had to change, and we were sailing at that point. We were sailing. The wind began to pick up. We had to take down the spinnaker. We were just using the jenny, and the wind was pretty strong. We even reefed the mainsail a little bit. That means you sort of had to carry less sail. I was a rail rider for this particular trip. I don't remember which one it was, but I was a rail rider, and I remember I'm sitting there on the side on the rails, and I'm wearing my life jacket. I've got my feet over the side, and I'm hanging onto the plastic covered safety wires that are there. They're called lifelines. They run through through metal poles that stick into, along the outside of the boat to keep your stuff and your crew from falling off. And I'm sitting there with my legs over the side because the wind's pretty high, and we need some weight on the high side in order to keep the boat as efficient as possible, as I explained. So we're out there and the rain starts, and the rain's not usually a big problem. A sailboat race is exciting. And usually if there's rain, there's wind, and if there's wind, you're flying, and you've got to keep the boat heeling properly, and to hang over the side with the boat racing by and the water splashing up and the waves. It's very exciting. Well, I was so busy enjoying myself, I didn't see what the skipper saw. All of a sudden, I heard the skipper yell, "Life jackets all around!" And for anyone who wasn't already wearing a life jacket, we had to make sure they got one on, is what he wanted. Truth was, he didn't wear a life jacket. He wanted his life jacket, and I didn't know what he saw, but then I looked around a little bit, and I saw what he saw, a water spout. Here was this water spout heading directly at us. Well, you see, a power boat has enough oomph that they can go ahead and sail. They can go ahead and motor and kick up some speed and go around the bad weather. But not a sailboat. Sailboat, you got to deal with the weather you have. And that's what it is. You can't outrun the weather. And we sure couldn't outrun this water spout. So he called for life jackets all around. And I saw this green gray wall of water coming at us. And poof, it hit us. And it took the boat. And I'm sitting there holding onto the lifeline, my legs over the side of the boat, sitting on the deck, and all of a sudden the boat rocks back. And I look behind me, as I look back into my head, and what do I see? The mast and the mainsail in the water. We have a full knockdown. Our boat was knocked flat. It's called a broach, and it seemed like I hung there forever. But it really wasn't forever. It was probably only a few seconds. And as soon as the water spout had passed over, when the water spout hit, the wind doubled at least. It went from blowing hard to ridiculously hard. and uh, and it knocked us down, and then it passed over. And when it did, of course, we were down, and then poof, because of the weight of the keel of the boat, it righted us back up. Well, that was like a real shock. But the strange thing was, it was this quiet. There was no wind at all. It's as if that water spout had sucked up all the wind, all the energy from the air around us. As a matter of fact, it seemed to last long enough that the skipper called for low side weight to try and get the sails to take that shape, that more efficient shape that would, and the hull to lean over just a little bit to be more efficient, to try and get some movement on the boat, to try to get the boat to sail forward. And so I was getting ready. I was crawling under the boom right across the deck when, boom, the wind picked up at its previous speed, which was pretty strong. Not as high as it was under the waterspout, but pretty good. So, man, I'm back crawling to the high side and throw my legs over the side. And so we sailed. We had quite a story to tell when we got to Mandeville, to the yacht club. I have to admit, it was pretty exciting. And we all had our stories to tell. We actually got hit by the waterspout. Another boat did too, and they tore their sail in this manner, and they were running around trying to figure out how to get their sail mended so they could race back the next day. That night, we spent the night on the boat, probably the only time I ever spent the night on the gale force. And there were so many boats at the Mandeville Yacht Club. We had to tie one boat to the other, one boat tied to the dock, and then the next boat tied to that boat, and the next boat tied to that boat, and we were like 4 deep in the raft, they call it. And this raft of boats, and it's polite to always walk across the bow if you have to walk across the boats. And I was sleeping on a berth down one of the bunks down below in the gale force. And I remember hearing somebody walk across the top of the bow in the middle of the night. But otherwise, it was quiet. It was beautiful. I mean, one thing, I felt so close to nature when I sailed. Just you and the wind, and learning how to read it, to know where the dead spots are, where there's no air, to see the little fine ripples, to know that the air is better there. To recognize the smell of what it smells like when the breeze is freshening and it getting stronger. To see the thunderstorms. And believe me, you don't want to be out in a sailboat on a thunderstorm. I've never been struck by lightning, but considering Lake Pontchartrain is 26 miles across, and I don't know how many miles long. It's almost a big oval. And with the 26 miles being the shorter part of the oval, so you know it's pretty big. to have this big mass sticking up, acting like a lightning rod. But fortunately, I was blessed. We never got struck by lightning. But those sailing days were quite wonderful, and I truly enjoyed them. It's funny, Brenda was on the boat with me the day we got a knockdown, and I thought it was invigorating, the day we went through the waterspout. And the next day at work, I talked about it, and I told the story, and I was so excited. And somebody said, and Brenda had worked nights, and in this case, I came the next day, and somebody asked me, were you and Brenda on the same boat? And I said, what? Well, you're all excited about this event, and Brenda talked about how terrifying it was. It was awful. Are you sure you were on the same boat? And I said, yeah, we were. I said, I guess it's just a matter of perspective. And I think that's true about many things in life. What's exciting for one person is terrifying to another. What seems good to one, bad for another. Well, I really enjoyed my days on the gale force. I'm going to go ahead and edit all this together. I did continue sailing, and I'll get into my adventures after I left the gale force. As it turned out, well, I didn't have it. I started to date a special man, and his entry and so I don't know. Going without him, that was when I met Chuck, and we began to date. And something else happened at the same time. Brenda decided to buy a boat. Now I couldn't afford she wanted me to go in on half on the boat, but I wasn't real crazy about that because I know partnerships can be the end to friendships when you do that sometimes. But what we did agree on was she'd buy the boat and I would pay for the slip. The monthly rent on the slip was $70 or $80, but I'd have free use of the boat, and so would she, and I'd help maintain the boat. It was about that time I started dating Chuck. So really sailing on without Chuck, crewing on the boat, as exciting as that had been, it was more fun to do things with him, although he did work a lot. And besides, now I had the joy of the boat Brenda and I owned. Well, the boat Brenda owned and I worked with. So I've run long on time, but I ended up sort of drifting away from sailing on the gale force, unless there was a big race like the Sugar Bowl Regatta, and they needed crew, which they always did in the wintertime because it's cold and windy and cold. Did I say cold and cold? Yeah, it's cold. And I did that. But we'll talk about that later. In the meantime, I hope everything's well with you. I look forward to things continuing to improve. And until then, God bless you.